My daughter-in-law whispered, "We'll kick him out after Christmas," but I had already sold the house. Get ready for today's story, but first hit like, share the love, and subscribe to our channel. I remember the first leaf that dropped that year. It was early October, golden and lazy, just sort of spinning down onto the porch railing like it had all the time in the world. I had all the time in the world too, or so I thought. Funny thing, how that feeling can be both a comfort and a lie at the same time. My name's Harlan Whitaker. Folks around here used to just call me Mr. Harlan, though most of them have moved on or forgotten I exist by now. That's all right. At my age, you stop worrying about who remembers you and start thinking more about the things worth remembering. The house on Maple Street had been mine for 47 years. My late wife Helen picked it out because of the old oak out front. She said it looked friendly, which is a strange way to describe a tree, but she wasn't wrong. That oak had seen everything: birthdays, thunderstorms, barbecue disasters, even our son Tom learning how to ride his first bike while crying like it was a punishment. Now the old place was quieter. The porch swing groaned when I sat down like it was tired of holding me up after all these years. The boards creaked in the same spots they always had. The air smelled like dust and leaves, and sometimes I could almost hear Helen humming in the kitchen. I'd catch myself talking to her without thinking, just muttering about the mail or how the neighbor's dog got into the trash again. It's a habit I never really shook. Tom came by every Sunday with his wife, Lisa. They'd bring me lunch, usually something store-bought, and ask how I was feeling, if I'd taken my pills, if I was sleeping okay. It was nice, though I could tell it was becoming more of a routine for them than a visit. You can feel it when people are checking boxes instead of checking in. Still, I didn't complain. When you're my age, you learn not to chase after affection. You take it how it comes. Lisa was polite, careful with her words, always smiling that smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I'd been around long enough to tell when someone's kindness had an expiration date. She'd tidy the kitchen after lunch like she owned the place already. Sometimes she'd linger in the doorway, arms folded, and look around like she was measuring the walls. It wasn't anything she said, just the way she looked at things, like the house was an investment instead of a home. Tom, bless him, was trying. He'd ask about the garden or the baseball game or the truck that still sat under the carport even though I hadn't driven it in 2 years. But you could tell he was nervous, always glancing at Lisa for approval before he spoke. My boy had grown careful, too careful, and that broke my heart more than I ever let on. It was one Sunday, about 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, when I first heard it. They thought I was napping in my chair. The TV was on low, the volume just enough to cover whispers. I wasn't asleep, though, just resting my eyes like old men do. And that's when I heard Lisa's voice from the kitchen, sharp but hushed. "We'll kick him out after Christmas," she said. I remember the way my heart slowed down right then, not sped up. It wasn't anger, not even sadness, just this cold understanding, like a puzzle piece clicking into place. I heard the clatter of dishes, then Tom mumbling something I couldn't make out, followed by Lisa again. "It's for the best, Tom. He can't live here alone forever. You know that. We'll find him a place." They didn't mean for me to hear it, but I did. And I sat there, eyes still closed, breathing through my nose, listening to the sound of their voices getting smaller as they moved toward the door. I waited until I heard the car pull away before I opened my eyes. The sunlight was coming through the blinds in long stripes across the floor. Dust floated in the air like snowflakes. I remember thinking how strange it was that something as harmless as dust could make a moment feel heavy. "Kicked out after Christmas," I said out loud. My voice sounded foreign, dry. Helen would have had a good laugh at that, probably told me to pack my things before they changed their minds. But she wasn't there to laugh. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and stared at the stack of envelopes in front of me. The one on top had been sitting there for months. Maple Realty Group. I'd gotten a few letters from them over the past year, offers to buy the house, cash in hand, they always said. I used to toss them, but this one I'd kept, maybe out of curiosity, maybe out of something deeper. I picked it up, opened it, and read the offer again. It wasn't much, less than what the place was worth probably, but it was enough. Enough for me to make a quiet decision before anyone else decided for me. The next morning I called the number. A young man named Kyle answered, cheerful and quick. He talked fast, like everyone his age seems to, promising a smooth sale and a quick close. I told him I wanted to move fast, no delays, no fuss. He said it could all be done before Christmas if I wanted. I told him that would be perfect. That night, I sat on the porch swing with a blanket around my shoulders, listening to the wind through the oak. I imagined Helen sitting beside me, smiling that small, knowing smile she used to give me when I'd finally caught on to something she already knew. "Don't worry, sweetheart," I said softly, looking out at the yard. "They won't have to kick me out." And as the last of the leaves dropped from that old oak tree, I decided it was time to let the house go. I didn't sleep much that night after I made the call. Not out of nerves, really. More like a restless sort of calm, if that makes sense. There's a strange peace that comes with making a decision you know can't be undone. It's like standing on the edge of a pond and finally deciding to jump in. The water's cold, sure, but at least you stop wondering what it feels like. When morning came, I made myself a real breakfast for the first time in months. Eggs, bacon, toast. Even used the good jam Helen used to hide behind the flour, the kind we'd only open when company comes. I figured after 47 years in the same house, I counted as company enough. The phone rang around 9. It was Kyle from Maple Realty, all bright-voiced and chipper, calling to set up a meeting. He said he could come by that afternoon, if you ought. I was free. I said I was always free these days. He laughed, not unkindly, though I don't think he caught the full weight of what I meant. When he showed up, I could tell right away he was one of those young men who thought being nice was the same as being good. Perfect haircut, shiny shoes, a watch that probably cost more than my first truck. He smiled big, the kind of smile that's been practiced in the rearview mirror. "Mr. Harlan, right?" he said, reaching out his hand. "Beautiful property you've got here. Classic. Real charm." "Charm's mostly paint and memory," I said, shaking his hand. "But she's held up." We sat at the kitchen table, same spot I'd had tea in the night before. He laid out his papers. Lots of pages, fine print, words like escrow and title transfer that used to mean something to me before time turned them into background noise. "I'll be honest with you, Mr. Harlan," he said, tapping the corner of a document. "This is a great deal for both of us. The market's strong. But older homes like this don't always move fast. We can offer you cash, close before Christmas, and handle all the cleanup. You won't have to lift a finger." "Good," I said. "I'm not in much of a lifting mood these days." He laughed again, a nervous, polite sound, and then started explaining things in that way young professionals do when they assume you've never bought a stick of gum without help. I let him go on for a while before I stopped him. "Kyle," I said, "I've sold 2 businesses, buried a wife, raised a son, and paid off 3 mortgages. You can skip the talking points." He blinked, then nodded slowly, that smile of his finally softening into something real. "Understood, sir. So you just want a clean sale, no delays?" "That's right," I said. "And you can skip the sir?" I stopped earning that title when I stopped wearing a tie. We finished the paperwork in about an hour. He left me with a few documents to sign once the notary came by, and I told him I didn't need to wait on anyone's approval. The house was mine, and that meant I had the right to say goodbye to it on my own terms. When he left, I stood in the doorway and watched him walk to his car. He waved, cheerful as ever, and drove off with his window down, whistling something that sounded like a Christmas tune. Christmas. It was only 6 weeks away, and already I could feel the cold setting into the bones of the house. Every floorboard groaned a little louder. Every draft crept in through the windows like an old memory. I walked through each room that day, slower than I meant to, touching the walls like they were old friends. In the living room, I could still see where Helen's favorite chair had been, a little indent in the carpet that never went away. In the hallway, the faint outline of where Tom's growth chart used to be before we painted over it when he left for college. I'd used pencil marks and dates back then, thinking we'd always have time to remember them. I spent the next few days cleaning out closets, one at a time. You wouldn't believe how much a life can collect. Old letters, worn-out coats, Helen's knitting box full of half-finished scarves. I didn't throw much away. Instead, I packed things into neat piles, one for Tom, one for the donation center, and one that was just for me. The for me pile was smaller than I expected. Around the third day, Tom called. "Hey, Dad," he said. His voice always sounded rushed, like the world was breathing down his neck. "How are things going?" "Fine," I said. "Been keeping busy." "Busy with what?" "Just making some changes around here." "Changes?" There was a pause on the line. "You're not climbing ladders or anything, are you? You promised me you'd leave that gutter alone." I smiled. "No ladders, just paperwork." He chuckled awkwardly, not catching my meaning. "Good. You know, Lisa was saying we should bring the kids by soon. They've been asking about Grandpa's house." I almost said they won't have to ask for long, but I bit my tongue. "That'd be nice," I said instead. After we hung up, I sat there for a while, staring at the silent phone. It's a funny thing, how we talk around what we really mean, like we're afraid the truth might be rude. 2 days later, the notary came. A quiet woman in her 30s, hair tied back, efficient but kind. She spread out the last few papers, asked me to sign where she'd marked, and checked my ID twice. "It'll all be official by next week," she said with a smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Harlan." I almost laughed. It didn't feel like something to congratulate. Selling a house you built your life in isn't exactly a win. It's more like closing a book that's too heavy to keep open. That night, I sat out on the porch again, same old blanket, same chair, same oak tree rustling in the cold. I thought about Helen, about how she'd probably scold me for not telling Tom first. But then again, she was always better at forgiveness than I was. The week went by quietly. Papers were filed, signatures sent, and by Thanksgiving it was done. The house on Maple Street no longer belonged to me. The money was sitting in my account, more than I'd ever need at my age. And still I felt both lighter and lonelier. Thanksgiving came with its usual mix of noise and politeness. Tom and Lisa hosted that year at their place, a modern house in one of those new neighborhoods where every driveway looks the same. When I arrived, the kids were playing video games, Lisa was fussing over the table, and Tom was carving the turkey like it was a test. "Dad," Tom said, surprised to see me right on time. "You made it." "Of course I did," I said. "You think I'd miss free pie?" Lisa smiled, tight as ever. "We're so glad you could come, Dad. Sit down, make yourself comfortable." Dinner went smoothly enough. Small talk, laughter, the usual stories. I kept quiet mostly, watching them all move around like a well-rehearsed play. At one point, Lisa asked, "So any plans for Christmas, Dad? We were thinking of hosting again, unless you'd rather stay home." "Home," I repeated softly, feeling the weight of that word. "We'll see." After dessert, while everyone was in the living room watching some movie, I stepped outside for a bit of air. The stars were faint behind the suburban glow. I stood on their patio, listening to the muffled laughter from inside, and thought about how small the world had become, or maybe just how small my part in it had grown. When I went back in, Lisa was tidying the kitchen. She didn't see me at first. She was on the phone, whispering again, the same sharp tone I remembered from before. "I'm serious, Tom," she said quietly. "It's not safe. He forgets things. He could leave the stove on, but he's alone too much. We'll tell him after Christmas, okay? That gives us time to find a decent place." My hand tightened on the doorframe. I didn't move, didn't say a word. I just stood there listening to the sound of her voice, calm, certain, rehearsed. When she hung up, I stepped into the light and said softly, "Lisa?" She jumped a little, turned around fast. "Oh, I didn't see you there. I was just talking," I said. "I know." There was a silence between us then, not angry, not even tense, just full, like both of us knew too much now. She opened her mouth to say something, maybe an apology, maybe an excuse, but I just nodded. "Don't worry," I said. "After Christmas is fine." And then I walked out to the car, waving to the kids on the way. On the drive home, I didn't play the radio, just the hum of the tires and the quiet rhythm of my own thoughts. I realized then that I wasn't angry at Lisa. Truth be told, she wasn't wrong. I was getting older, slower, forgetful sometimes. Maybe I did leave the stove on once or twice. Maybe I was living in a house too big for one man and a few ghosts. But there's a difference between being helped and being dismissed, between love and management. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light flicked on automatically. I'd set it that way years ago, back when Helen used to come home late from the store. The light hit the oak tree just right, and for a moment it looked almost golden again. I stood there in the yard, hands in my coat pockets, and whispered to the empty air, "Well, sweetheart, looks like we've been evicted." And I laughed. Honest to God laughed. The kind of laugh that hurts your chest a little but feels good anyway. That night I made myself another cup of tea and started packing for real. Not the maybe someday kind of packing, but the this is it kind. I boxed up photos, folded clothes, took down the curtains Helen had sewn by hand. By the time I crawled into bed, the rooms already felt different, lighter, emptier. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what would come next. I didn't have a plan yet. Not exactly. But I knew one thing for certain. Come Christmas morning, when Tom and Lisa came over expecting to kick me out, they'd find a house already sold, already empty. And maybe, just maybe, they'd finally stop treating me like a burden. Or maybe they'd just stand there in the echo of the home they'd taken for granted and realize that sometimes the people you plan to move aside have already moved on. Either way, I'd be long gone before they found out. The morning after Thanksgiving, the house was so still you could hear the clock tick like it was keeping time for someone else. I sat at the kitchen table, same as I had for decades, with my coffee going cold in front of me. The papers were signed, the sale was official, and I was no longer the owner of 214 Maple Street. The young man from Maple Realty said I could take my time moving out. He told me the new owners wouldn't take possession until early January. That gave me about 5 weeks. 5 weeks to pack up a lifetime, one box at a time. I started in the attic. That's where memories go to wait, you know, attics and basements. Things you can't throw away but don't need to see every day. The smell hit me first, that mix of dust, cedar, and old cardboard. I climbed those creaky steps slower than I used to, my knees protesting every inch, but I made it. I switched on the single bulb hanging from the ceiling, and there it was, a museum of my own past. There were boxes labeled Christmas and Tom's school stuff, an old trunk of Helen's with stickers from the trips we took when we still thought travel could fix a marriage argument, and that ugly lamp she bought at a flea market because she said it had character. It still did. Too much, if you asked me. I opened one box labeled miscellaneous, which is another way of saying things we didn't know what to do with. Inside was a collection of photographs, some yellowing at the edges, others Polaroid still sharp as yesterday. Helen and me at the county fair, Tom holding up a fish almost bigger than him, our dog Duke lying on the porch with his head on Helen's lap. I sat down on an old folding chair up there, the wood groaning under my weight, and let those memories wash over me. It's funny how photographs lie. They catch the smiles, the best lighting, the right moments, but they don't catch the silence between them. The arguments about money, the nights Helen cried after the doctor gave her the bad news, the sound of the door closing when Tom left for college and the house suddenly became too big. I found a box marked Helen's keepsakes. Inside was her wedding dress, yellowed but still delicate, a strand of pearls she wore to church every Easter, and a note written in her handwriting, "For Tom and whoever he loves enough to marry." I sat with that note for a long time. I never told her Lisa wasn't the kind of woman who'd appreciate those pearls. She would have figured it out herself if she were still here. By noon I was covered in dust and sweat, surrounded by piles of keep, donate, and I don't know. The I don't know pile grew faster than the others. I realized that letting go of things isn't about deciding what to keep. It's about admitting what no longer belongs to you. I went downstairs for lunch, opened a can of soup, and stared out the window at that oak tree. Its branches were bare now, reaching up at the gray sky like fingers asking for something they'd never get back. That tree had shaded every chapter of my life on that property. I wondered if the new owners would cut it down. Halfway through my soup, the phone rang. It was Tom. "Hey, Dad, just checking in. How was the drive home last night?" "Smooth," I said. "Roads were clear." Good, good. Listen, about Christmas. Lisa was thinking maybe we could do it at your place this year. You know, one last time before we figure things out." Before they kick me out, he meant. I could hear it in his voice. That sounds nice, I said. I'll make sure the place looks good. He hesitated, then said, You doing okay, Dad? You sound a little off. Just tired, I lied. A lot of cleaning to do before the holidays. Well, don't overdo it. Maybe I'll come by this weekend to help you with a few things. No need, I said, quick enough to make it sound casual. I've got it handled. He paused again, the way he used to when he was a boy trying to read my face. All right, if you're sure. I'm sure, I said. After we hung up, I sat there for a while, staring at the phone, feeling something between guilt and relief. I knew I was deceiving him in a way. But I also knew that sometimes mercy looks like secrecy. That afternoon, I packed up the living room. The bookshelf was the hardest. Helen and I used to read to each other at night, taking turns. Her with her mysteries, me with my old westerns. I ran my fingers over the spines like they were old friends. I was saying goodbye to. I packed a few, left most. The new owners might like them, or maybe they'd toss them out. Either way, I wouldn't be here to see it. The next day, I drove into town to visit the bank. The teller, a young woman with bright red nails, recognized me. Morning, Mr. Harlan, she said. How's the old house treating you? I smiled faintly. She's about ready for her next owner. Oh, she said, surprised. You're selling? Already did, I said, just tying up loose ends. Well, good for you, she said, in that tone people use when they don't know whether to be happy or sorry for you. I withdrew a portion of the money, enough to set up a few things I had in mind. When you've lived long enough, you realize there are ways to say thank you and goodbye at the same time. Back home, I made a list. Nothing fancy, just a few lines scribbled on an old envelope. At the top, I wrote, For Tom and the kids. I wasn't going to leave them with guilt or confusion. If they wanted to build a life without worrying about me, I'd help them do it right. That evening, I called a place just outside town, a quiet little retirement community called Brookview Lodge. I'd driven past it before, noticed the big trees and the walking paths, the kind of place that didn't feel like a waiting room for the end. I asked if they had space. They did. The woman on the phone was kind. Patient. She told me about the rooms, the activities, the meals. She asked if I had family nearby. Yes, I said, but they're busy. I'm looking for a place where I can just breathe. She said I could come by for a tour anytime. I told her I'd be there next Tuesday. That night, sleep came easy for the first time in weeks. Maybe it was the relief of having a plan, or maybe it was just that kind of exhaustion that sits deeper than bones. Over the next few days, I kept packing. The kitchen took the longest. Every dish had a story. The chipped mug Helen used for her morning coffee, the big casserole dish she swore made her lasagna taste better, the faded dish towel with a rooster on it that Tom had given her for Mother's Day when he was 8. I wrapped them all carefully, talking to them like they could hear me. On Sunday, Tom showed up anyway, despite my polite refusal. I saw his car pulling into the driveway and didn't even have time to hide the moving boxes. He walked in with a smile that faltered the second he saw them. What's all this? Just cleaning out, I said. Cleaning out? Dad, this looks like you're moving. I set down the box I was holding and met his eyes. That's because I am. He blinked. Moving where? Brookview Lodge, over on County Road 9. Nice little place. I already have a room lined up. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. When were you going to tell me? Now seems like a good time, I said gently. He rubbed his forehead, pacing a little. Dad, why didn't you talk to me about this first? You don't have to. I know, I said, cutting him off, but I wanted to. He stopped pacing. What about the house? You can't afford both. That's handled too, I said. He stared at me for a long moment, and then the realization dawned on his face. You sold it. I nodded. Dad, he said, voice cracking just a little, you sold the house without telling me? Without asking your permission, I corrected. There's a difference. He sank into a chair, running his hands through his hair. Lisa's going to lose it when she hears this. I imagine she will, I said calmly. He looked up at me, eyes wet now. Why, Dad, you could have stayed. We would have figured something out. I sat down across from him. You were planning to kick me out after Christmas, Tom. The words hung there between us. I watched them hit him like a wave. His face went pale, his shoulders slumped. You heard that, he said quietly. I did. He covered his face with his hands. Dad, I'm sorry. It wasn't It wasn't what it sounded like. Lisa was just worried about you, about the house, about... I know, I said. She's not wrong. I shouldn't be living here alone, but I'll be damned if I'm going to wait around to be managed like a chore on your list. He looked up at me then, and for a second I saw the boy he used to be, the one who'd scrape his knees and look at me like I could fix anything. I never meant to hurt you, he said. I know, I said again. That's why I'm not angry. You're a good man, Tom. You've got a family to think about. But so do I, even if my family's just me now. He sat there, quiet, nodding slowly. After a while, he said, So, what happens next? I finish packing. You have Christmas here if you still want it, and then you move on, same as me. He nodded again, then stood up. Okay, Dad. He walked over, put his hand on my shoulder, and said softly, You really are something else. I'll take that as a compliment, I said. When he left, I stood at the window and watched him drive away, taillights glowing red against the dark. I knew he'd have to explain it all to Lisa, and that conversation wouldn't be pretty. But that was their burden, not mine. That night I sat on the porch again, a habit I knew I'd miss. The cold air bit at my fingers, but I didn't mind. The stars were out, clear and sharp, and I could almost feel Helen beside me. Well, sweetheart, I said quietly, the hard part's done. The wind rustled through the oak tree, and I swear it sounded like she was laughing. I smiled, finished my tea, and went inside to pack the last box labeled Porch Memories. Inside went the blanket, the small tin of nails I'd used to fix the railing every spring, and a smooth stone Helen once said looked like a heart. It didn't look much like one to me back then, but tonight it did. The first week of December rolled in with a gray sky and a kind of chill that crept into the house no matter how high I turned up the thermostat. I'd always loved that in-between time, the days when the world seemed to pause before the holidays truly began. But this year, it felt different. Every carol, every blinking light downtown, every whiff of pine from the wreath I'd hung on the porch, all of it felt like a farewell I hadn't quite written yet. I'd packed up most of the house by then. The boxes were stacked neatly in the dining room, labeled with thick black marker. Bedroom, kitchen, photos, tools, Miska. Some were headed for Brookview, some to donation, and just a few to Tom's garage, though he didn't know that yet. I'd made sure everything was squared away with the realtor. The check had cleared, the papers were signed, and the house, legally speaking, was no longer mine. But I was still there. The man without the deed, the ghost who hadn't moved out yet. Tom came by a couple of times during those weeks, sometimes with the kids, sometimes alone. I could tell he wanted to make up for that conversation after Thanksgiving, though he didn't quite know how. He'd bring over groceries, fix the loose hinge on the back door, shovel the porch steps after the first snow. We didn't talk about the house. We just worked side by side in quiet understanding. One night after the kids had gone home, he lingered a bit longer than usual. The fire was going, soft crackle filling the silence, and he said, Dad, I've been thinking, maybe Lisa and I overstepped. We just wanted to help, you know. I nodded. I know you did, son. He poked at the fire with the poker, watching the embers glow. You sure you want to go to Brookview? I mean, you could stay with us for a while. We've got the guest room, and the kids would love it. I smiled at that. You mean the office? He chuckled softly. Yeah, well, it's got a bed in it now. I appreciate it, I said, but I've made my peace with it. Brookview's quiet. They've got a big garden out back. Maybe I'll finally learn how to grow something that doesn't die on me. He smiled faintly but didn't argue. We sat there for a long while watching the flames die down. When he finally left, he hugged me, longer than usual, and I felt a kind of tremble in his arms. I think he was starting to understand that I wasn't coming back from this decision. The next morning I got a call from Kyle, the realtor. He said the buyers were happy with the move-out timeline and that the closing had gone smoother than he expected. They're planning some renovations after the new year, he said. New paint, maybe knock down that kitchen wall. But they love the place, Mr. Harlan. Said it has good bones. Good bones, I repeated, smiling to myself. Yeah, she's held up pretty well. After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a long time. My hand resting on the counter Helen used to roll her pie crusts on. The sunlight was streaming in through the window, hitting the exact spot where she used to hum while cooking. It made me ache in a good way, like remembering an old song you didn't know you still loved. That weekend I went down to Brookview for the tour. It was about a half-hour drive from Maple Street, out past the edge of town where the houses gave way to open fields and bare trees. The place was quiet, neat, with a big pond in the middle where a few ducks waddled across the frozen surface. The air smelled clean, like cedar and coffee. A woman named Sandra showed me around. She had the kind of voice that made you feel at ease, like she'd been talking to old folks her whole life. She showed me the dining hall, the lounge with the fireplace, the little library with shelves of worn paperbacks. "We try to make it feel like home here," she said. "I think I've had enough of home," I said softly, not meaning it unkindly. She smiled gently. "Well, then maybe it can be a fresh start." She showed me a room on the second floor, small, clean, with a view of the pond. "This one's open," she said. "If you decide to move in after Christmas, we can hold it for you." I looked out the window, watched the ducks slide across the ice, and said, "Yeah, this'll do just fine." On the drive back, I stopped at the diner Helen and I used to go to on Sunday mornings. The same waitress, Joan, still worked there. Hair grayer now, but her smile hadn't changed. "Mr. Harlan," she said, surprised. "Haven't seen you in ages. You still like your coffee black?" "That's the only way it tastes like coffee," I said, grinning. She laughed and brought me a cup just the way I remembered. I sat there at the counter eating my eggs and toast, and for a little while it felt like nothing had changed. But then the bell above the door rang and a couple of kids walked in with phones in their hands, laughing about something I didn't understand, and the moment passed. When I got home that afternoon, the house looked smaller somehow. Maybe it was the boxes, or maybe it was just me finally seeing it the way others did. An old man rattling around in a space built for a family. I sat in the living room and thought about the first Christmas Helen and I spent there. It was 1979. The house was drafty then, too, and we'd barely scraped together enough money for a tree. But she'd made ornaments out of scraps of fabric and tin foil, and we'd laughed ourselves silly trying to string popcorn without breaking it. I remember her sitting on the floor, lights tangled around her legs, saying, "If the house burns down, at least it'll look festive." God, I missed her laugh. The days crept closer to Christmas, and I could tell Tom was trying harder. He came by with the kids to help me decorate, even though half the decorations were already in boxes. We managed to find the old tree stand and a few strings of lights that still worked. The grandkids, Lily and Evan, helped me hang ornaments. "Grandpa, where's Grandma Helen's angel topper?" Lily asked. "Right here," I said, pulling it out of a box. The old thing had lost most of its glitter, but her little porcelain face still looked serene. "Can I put it on?" she asked. "Of course you can." She climbed up on a chair and, with Tom steadying her, placed the angel on top of the tree. I looked at that crooked little thing, leaning slightly to one side, and thought it was the most beautiful tree I'd seen in years. That night, after everyone left, I sat by the lit tree with a glass of Helen's favorite brandy. The lights reflected off the window, soft and warm, and for a moment I could almost believe she was sitting in her chair again, knitting something no one needed. "Last Christmas in this house," I said aloud. "Let's make it a good one." On Christmas Eve, Tom and Lisa came early. Lisa was polite, even gentle. I could tell she knew she'd been overheard weeks back. Tom must have told her, but we didn't talk about it. Some things don't need fixing, just acknowledgement. She helped in the kitchen while I cooked. Yes, cooked. Helen's roast chicken recipe, same one we'd used every Christmas. It took half the day, but I didn't mind. Cooking always felt like a conversation between the past and the present. The kids tore through the wrapping paper that night, their laughter filling every quiet corner of the house that had missed it. I sat back, watching them, feeling a peace I hadn't felt in a long time. At one point, Tom leaned over and said, "Dad, I know I already said it, but thank you for letting us do this here." I looked around the room, the fire, the stockings, the crooked tree, and smiled. Wouldn't have it any other way. We stayed up late, talking, eating pie, playing cards. Even Lisa laughed, real laughter this time, the kind that comes from somewhere honest. It was the kind of night Helen would have loved. When they finally bundled up to leave, Tom said, "We'll come by tomorrow to help you pack up what's left." "Don't worry about it," I said. "You've done plenty." "Dad," he said, his voice soft, "are you sure?" "I'm sure." He looked at me for a moment, then nodded. "Merry Christmas, Dad." "Merry Christmas, son." I watched them drive off, their taillights fading into the snowy night, and then I turned back to the house. The fire had burned low, and the only light came from the tree. I walked over, took one last look at the angel on top, and whispered, "We did all right, Helen." Then I turned off the lights and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. The world outside was covered in snow, untouched and still. I brewed a cup of coffee, sat on the porch one last time, and watched the light creep over the horizon. The moving van would come in 2 days. I had everything ready. I'd already sent my deposit to Brookview. The house keys were sealed in an envelope on the counter. I stood up, stretched my aching back, and looked out at that oak tree one final time. It stood tall and quiet, dusted with snow, branches reaching high against the pale sky. "Take care of whoever comes next," I said. "You've done right by me." Then I turned around, went inside, and closed the door gently behind me. The last few days before I left Maple Street felt like being halfway between two worlds. Every sound in that old house seemed louder than usual. The kettles whistle, the floors creak, even the way the mail slot clinked when the postman dropped in one last bundle of circulars I wouldn't bother to open. I'd packed everything except the bare necessities. One coffee mug, one pan, a few shirts, a toothbrush, and a small box of things I hadn't quite decided what to do with yet. The rooms echoed when I walked through them. The place didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like I was borrowing time from it. On the morning of December 27th, I woke up early. It was still dark out, that deep, cold quiet that only comes right before dawn. I made a cup of coffee, pulled on my old wool sweater, and sat down in my chair in the living room. The Christmas tree still stood in the corner, lights unplugged now, leaning a little more than before. I hadn't had the heart to take it down yet. It was strange, sitting there knowing it would be the last morning I'd ever see that room lit up by sunrise. You live in a place long enough, and it becomes part of your rhythm. The walls know when you wake up, the pipes hum when you start the shower, the stairs remember your step. I felt like I was leaving behind not just a home, but a witness to my whole life. I thought about Helen again. I thought about how she used to wake up before me, put on her robe, and shuffle into the kitchen to make coffee. She'd hum some old hymn under her breath, off-key but sweet. I could almost hear it that morning, faint and soft, mixing with the sound of the wind outside. By 8 o'clock, the movers showed up, 2 young guys, polite enough but clearly more interested in getting done early than in nostalgia. They called me "Sir" every other sentence and asked where to start. "Everything in the dining room goes," I said. "The rest stays." They worked fast, all business, hauling out the boxes I'd so carefully labeled. The thud of footsteps and the scrape of cardboard against the doorframe filled the silence that had settled into the house these past few days. I stood off to the side watching, not really knowing what to do with my hands. At one point, the taller one looked at me and said, "Moving far, sir?" "Just down the road a piece," I said. "New chapter." He nodded, though what? I doubt he cared much about my chapters. Still, there was something kind in his eyes. Maybe he'd helped enough old folks move to know what it really meant. They were done by noon. I tipped them more than I should have, thanked them, and watched the truck pull away. When the rumble of the engine faded, the silence rushed back in like a tide. I walked through the empty rooms one last time, the way you'd walk through a memory before closing the book. The kitchen smelled faintly of roast chicken and lemon cleaner. The living room carpet had a worn patch where my chair used to sit, and I caught myself stepping around it like it was still there. In the hallway, I stopped by the wall where we'd measured Tom's height as he grew up. The pencil marks were still faintly visible, even after all the times we'd painted over them. I ran my fingers over the ridges. Tom, age 7. Tom, age 10. Then higher up, Tom, age 15. "Stop growing, boy." Helen had written that one in her neat handwriting. I smiled through the lump in my throat. Upstairs, the bedroom looked smaller without the furniture. just an empty shell with pale rectangles on the wall where pictures had hung. I went to the window and looked out at the oak tree again. The snow had melted off its branches in thin lines, glistening in the morning light. "Thank you," I whispered to the tree, feeling ridiculous, but meaning it all the same. Back downstairs, I picked up the small box I'd left out on the counter. It held a few of Helen's things, a photograph from our wedding day, her pearl necklace, that silly heart-shaped stone from the porch. I tucked it carefully under my arm. Before I left, I took one last look around. Then I went to the mantel and placed an envelope there, propped up against the clock. It was addressed to Tom and Lisa. Inside was a short letter. "Tom and Lisa, by the time you read this, I'll be settling into my new place at Brookview. Don't worry about the house. It's taken care of, and so are the bills. This old place belonged to your mother and me for a long time, but it was never meant to be a museum. Houses are like people. They live, they change, and when the time comes, they let go. You were both trying to do right by me, even if it came out sideways. I forgive that. Truly. You've got your own lives to build, and I don't want to be the reason you hesitate. Take what you want from what's left. The rest can go to someone who needs it more than we ever will. I only ask one thing. Keep a photo of this house somewhere. Not for me, but for the memories that raised you. Love, Dad P. Don't forget to water that oak out front come spring. It likes to be remembered." I set the envelope down gently, then grabbed my coat and hat. The doorknob felt cold in my hand, and for a second I just stood there, listening. No creak from upstairs, no hum from the fridge, no sound of life, just quiet. Then I opened the door, stepped out into the cold, and didn't look back. The drive to Brookview was short, but it felt longer than any trip I'd ever taken. My truck was packed light, the heater wheezing warm air, the radio playing static until I found an oldies station that was halfway clear. Somewhere between town and the edge of the fields, they played a song Helen used to hum, "Blue Moon." I had to pull over for a minute, not because I was crying exactly, but because I couldn't see straight. When I finally pulled into Brookview's parking lot, Sandra was waiting out front. She waved and came over to help me with my bags. "Welcome home, Mr. Harlan," she said warmly. "Just Harlan's fine," I said, "and we'll see about that home part." She smiled. "It grows on you faster than you think." The place was as quiet as before, clean halls, soft lighting, the smell of cinnamon from the kitchen. My room looked just like it had the week before, neat, small, with that same view of the pond. I unpacked slowly, setting my few things in place. Helen's photo went on the nightstand, her pearls in the top drawer, the heart-shaped stone by the window. When I finished, I sat on the bed and took a long breath. It felt lighter. Not happy exactly, but settled, like putting down a heavy box after carrying it too long. That evening I wandered down to the dining room. A few of the residents were already eating, mostly older folks like me, each with their own quiet stories. One man with suspenders and a head of white hair nodded as I walked by. "New here?" he asked. "First day," I said. "Name's Walt," he said, offering his hand. "Welcome to the waiting room." I laughed at that, and he grinned. "Relax, son," he said. "We ain't all waiting to die. Some of us are just waiting for dessert." We sat together for dinner. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, peas. Not Helen's cooking, but good enough. Walt told me he'd been there 3 years since his wife passed. Said he thought it'd be the end of him at first, but it turned out to be a kind of beginning instead. "You'll find your rhythm here," he said. "Takes a bit, but it comes." That night I lay in bed listening to the faint hum of the building, footsteps in the hall, the soft whir of heaters, someone laughing down the corridor. It wasn't home, not yet, but it didn't feel wrong either. Just different. The next morning, I woke early, made some coffee from the little machine in my room, and looked out the window. The pond was half frozen again, sunlight bouncing off the ice. Ducks were back, waddling like nothing in the world had changed. I thought about Maple Street, about Tom and Lisa walking into that empty house, finding the note on the mantel. I wondered what they'd say, whether they'd be angry or sad or maybe just quiet. But then I realized it didn't matter. Sometimes the best way to love people is to stop needing them to understand you. A few days later, I got a call from Tom. He didn't say much, just that they'd found my letter, that they'd stopped by the house, and that Lisa had cried when she saw the pencil marks on the wall. "You really sold it, huh?" he said. "I really did," I said. There was a pause, then he asked, "You happy there, Dad?" "I'm getting there," I said honestly. "Good," he said quietly. "I miss you already." "I'm not that far away," I told him. "And besides, it's about time you started missing me before I was gone." He laughed, the kind of small, cracked laugh you only make when you're trying not to cry. "You're still a pain in the neck," he said. "Runs in the family," I said. We hung up, and I sat there for a while, the phone warm in my hand. The light coming through the window hit Helen's photo just right, like she was smiling at me again. I realized then that I wasn't lonely. Not really. I'd just been holding on too tight to something that had already finished its story. That night I joined Walt and a few others for cards in the lounge. We played rummy until someone burned the popcorn in the microwave and set off the smoke alarm. We all laughed until we coughed, and it felt good. Real, unplanned laughter. Later, when I got back to my room, I looked out the window one more time. Snow was starting to fall again, soft and slow, blanketing the pond. I thought of Maple Street, of the oak tree, of Helen's laugh drifting through the house. I whispered, "We did all right, sweetheart." And this time it didn't hurt to say it. It just felt true. Time has a way of smoothing out even the roughest edges if you let it. Winter faded slowly that year, giving up its hold on the town inch by inch. The pond outside my window thawed first in little patches, then all at once. The ducks came back in full force, squawking and flapping around like they owned the place. The trees along the walking path started to blush with green again, and that particular smell of wet earth and grass drifted through my open window most mornings. I'd been at Brookview for about 3 months by then. Long enough that the hall stopped feeling like a hotel and more like, well, a place I belonged. Not home exactly. Nothing could replace that, but something close enough that it didn't ache to think about anymore. Most days had a rhythm to them. Breakfast at 8 sharp, scrambled eggs, toast, oatmeal if you were feeling virtuous, then a walk outside if the weather allowed, lunch at noon, dinner at 5, card games in the lounge after that. It was predictable, steady. And after years of chaos and loss and hard conversations, steady felt like a kind of blessing. Walt and I had become something close to friends, though he'd never admit to anything so sentimental. He had a way of making every serious moment sound like a joke. When I told him about the house, how I'd sold it without telling my family first, he just whistled low and said, "Well, that's one way to write your own ending." We'd sit by the pond sometimes, him feeding crackers to the ducks while I just watched the water. "You ever regret it?" he asked once, tossing a crumb. "Selling the house? Yeah, or leaving before they were ready." I thought about that a long while. "No," I said finally. "I regret not saying some things sooner. But leaving? No. Sometimes you have to make peace with yourself before anyone else can." He nodded like he understood. I think he did. Walt had his own ghosts. We all did there. One morning in early April, Sandra, the manager, came by my room with a letter. "Looks like this one's from your son," she said, handing it to me with a smile. The envelope was thick, the kind of paper people use when they mean what they're writing. My name was written in Tom's handwriting, neat and careful, like he'd slowed down for every letter. "Thanks," I said, taking it. She lingered a moment. "You've got a good family, Mr. Dowd Harlan." "I do," I said softly. "Took me a while to see it, but I do." When she left, I sat down in my chair by the window and opened the letter. "Dad, I've been meaning to write this for weeks, but every time I tried, it came out wrong. So I'm just going to say it plain. When we came by the house after Christmas and found your letter, I didn't know what to feel. I was angry at first. Angry you sold it without telling us, angry you made that decision on your own. But after walking through those empty rooms, I realized something. It was never my house to begin with. It was yours and Mom's. It was built on your memories, not mine. You gave me the best years you could in that place. And maybe I took for granted that it would always be there waiting for us." Lisa cried when she found the marks on the hallway wall. The kids did too, though they didn't really understand why. We spent hours there that day, just remembering. I took the angel from the tree, I hope that's okay. It felt wrong to leave it behind. We've been talking a lot since then, Lisa and me, about how we treated you before Christmas. She said something that stuck with me. She said, sometimes love looks selfish when it's scared. I think that's what we were. Scared of losing you. Scared of what that would mean for us. I'm sorry for the way we made you feel unwanted. You've always been the heart of this family, even when you were too stubborn to say so. The kids miss you, Dad. They talk about visiting Brookview all the time. Lily drew a picture of you sitting under that big oak tree, holding a book. I think she remembers things better than we give her credit for. I miss you too. I didn't realize how quiet the world would feel without your voice in it every day. We'd like to come visit next Sunday, if that's all right. Bring lunch. Maybe take a walk. I hope you're happy there. You deserve some peace. Love, Tom. By the time I finished reading, my hands were shaking a little. I sat there for a while, the letter resting on my lap, just listening to the wind outside the window. I don't know what I expected to feel, maybe guilt, maybe relief, but what I felt most was warmth. Like something in my chest had finally loosened its grip. I read the letter again, slower this time, letting every word settle. When I got to the part about Lily's drawing, I couldn't help but smile. Helen would have loved that kid, curious, kind, always asking why about everything. That Sunday, true to his word, Tom showed up with Lisa and the kids. They brought fried chicken and potato salad, just like old picnic days. The kids ran ahead, waving at everyone, while Lisa carried a basket and Tom held a small cooler under one arm. When I saw them coming down the path, something inside me, something I didn't even know I was still holding, finally eased. "Dad," Tom called, grinning, "you look good." "Well, that's a matter of lighting and low expectations," I said, and he laughed. Lisa hugged me, gentle but sincere. "It's beautiful here," she said, looking around at the garden. "Peaceful. It's growing on me," I said. "The ducks are a little arrogant, though," the kids giggled. "Can we feed them?" Evan asked. "Sure," I said, "but they're greedy little things. Don't get too close or you'll lose a finger." We ate under the gazebo by the pond, the air warm and full of that spring smell. Mud, flowers, something waking up again. The kids chattered the whole time, showing me their drawings and telling me about school. Lisa helped me with the lemonade, fussing like Helen used to, and Tom just sat there smiling, quieter than I'd ever seen him. At one point he said, "Dad, I talked to the people who bought the house." I looked up. "Oh?" "They've already started fixing it up. Painted the porch, new shutters, stuff like that, but they said they're keeping the oak tree. Said it's too beautiful to cut down." I nodded slowly. "Good, that tree's got roots deeper than anyone realizes." He hesitated, then added, "They found the heart-shaped stone by the porch, said they thought it was a sign of good luck." I couldn't help but chuckle. "Guess your mother's still making herself useful." We sat there in the sun for hours, eating, laughing, remembering. It wasn't forced this time. It wasn't about fixing what had been broken. It was just about being together again. Before they left, Lily tugged at my sleeve. "Grandpa, do you like it here?" I looked around. The pond, the trees, the faint smell of lilac starting to bloom. "Yeah, sweetheart," I said. "I like it just fine." "Good," she said, serious as anything, "because I made you something." She handed me a folded piece of paper. Inside was a drawing, me sitting on a bench under the big oak tree, the same one from the old house, with ducks all around and the sun shining down. Across the top she'd written in big, careful letters, "Grandpa's new home." I felt my throat tighten, but I smiled and said, "It's perfect." When they drove away later that afternoon, I stood there waving until the car turned out of sight. The wind rustled through the trees, soft and steady. I looked up at the sky, bright blue just like the one in Lily's picture, and thought maybe this is what peace looks like. That night I sat at my desk and wrote a letter back to Tom. "Tom, thank you for coming today. It meant more than I can say. You've got a good family. Kind, funny, full of life. Hold on to that, because it's the best kind of wealth there is. I know it hurt when I sold the house, but I hope you understand now. It wasn't about leaving you. It was about finding a place where I could remember your mother without feeling like she was still waiting for me in the next room. She used to tell me, 'You can't hang all your happiness on one nail, or it'll come loose.' Took me a long time to figure out what she meant, but I think I've got it now. I want you to know I'm proud of you, not just for what you've done, but for the man you keep trying to be. That's all any of us can do. Keep trying. Give the kids a hug from me, and tell Lisa she makes a mean potato salad. Love. Dad, I sealed the letter, left it on my desk to mail the next morning, and sat back in my chair. Outside, the moonlight shimmered on the pond. Somewhere in the distance, I heard frogs starting to sing again, the first of the season. I thought about the past few months, about all the goodbyes and quiet mornings, about how endings have a way of turning into beginnings when you're not looking. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to end. I felt like I was right where I needed to be. The year rolled on, and before I knew it, summer had settled over Brookview. The air grew thick with the smell of cut grass and honeysuckle, and the days stretched themselves long and lazy. The pond shimmered under the sun like a sheet of glass, and in the evenings it caught the sunset just right, orange and gold spilling across the water until it looked like fire. That was my favorite time of day, always had been. Sunset felt like a conversation between the world and whatever comes after. Maybe that's why I'd started spending most evenings on the little bench by the west side of the property. It wasn't really a porch, not like the one I used to have on Maple Street, but it faced west and had that same stillness I remembered. If I squinted, I could almost see Helen sitting beside me, her hands folded in her lap, humming something quiet and tuneless. Walt joined me there most nights. He'd bring 2 cans of ginger ale, hand me one, and say, "To the survivors." Then we'd toast without saying what we were surviving exactly. Life, I guess. He'd started calling that bench the porch, and soon everyone else did too. "You heading to the porch tonight?" they'd ask. "See you on the porch," they'd say after dinner. Funny how fast a thing becomes tradition when it fills a quiet space. One evening in late June, Tom came to visit again, this time by himself. He brought a thermos of coffee and a box of old photos. "Thought we could take a trip down memory lane," he said, settling beside me on the porch bench. We went through the box together, the air warm and soft around us. There were pictures of the house being built, Helen in her garden, me holding baby Tom with that look of wonder young fathers get before the exhaustion sets in. There were Christmas mornings, camping trips, graduations, whole lifetimes caught in squares of paper. Tom held up one of Helen at the county fair, standing beside a pie table with her ribbon-winning blueberry masterpiece. Her smile was bright, proud, just like I remembered. "I forgot she used to wear her hair like that," he said. "She hated that haircut," I said, laughing. Said she looked like a news anchor, but it was summer and she was tired of baking with it down. He smiled, shaking his head. "She really was something, wasn't she?" "Still is," I said quietly. We sat there for a long time without talking, just letting the past flicker between us like the fireflies starting to rise from the grass. Eventually Tom said, "You know, Lisa wants to bring the kids next weekend. Maybe we could all have a picnic here. They'd love this pond." "That sounds good," I said. "There's a spot by the willow tree that's perfect for blankets." He nodded, then hesitated. "Dad, do you ever wish you hadn't done it? Sold the house, I mean?" I thought about that for a moment, the crickets humming their steady song all around us. "No," I said finally, "not once." He looked surprised. "Not even a little?" "I miss what it held," I said, "but not the place itself. I learned something after your mom passed. Son, grief tries to make you freeze time. It whispers that if you hold still long enough, the person you lost might walk back through the door. But they don't. The world keeps moving, and sooner or later you have to start walking again, or it leaves you behind." Tom was quiet a long time after that. Then he said, "I think I understand now. Why you left, I mean." "I figured you would," I said with a smile. Before he left that night, he hugged me. Not a quick one, not the kind you give out of duty, but a real one, the kind that says more than words can. When he drove away, I sat back on that bench, watching the taillights fade into the dusk, and I realized something simple and steady. Forgiveness doesn't always need a grand speech. Sometimes it just shows up, sits beside you, and stays. The next weekend, Lisa and the kids came like Tom promised. They brought sandwiches, lemonade, and one of those red and white checkered blankets that never stays flat no matter how many times you smooth it. The kids chased ducks, got grass stains, and begged for ice cream before lunch. Some things never change, Lisa said, laughing. Wouldn't want them to, I said. She was kinder now, softer around me. Whatever guilt she carried from before, she'd traded it for a kind of warmth that felt genuine. We talked about the kids, about her work, about Tom's new project at the office. She told me she'd started volunteering at a food bank downtown. It makes me feel grounded, she said. That's a good reason to do anything, I said. Later, when the kids wandered off to play by the pond, she turned to me and said, I never told you I was sorry. I looked at her, saw the sincerity in her eyes, and said, You didn't have to. But thank you anyway. She smiled, and something in that small moment mended itself quietly between us. As summer deepened, my world at Brookview grew smaller but richer. Mornings were for reading and walking the paths, afternoons for napping or chatting with whoever sat near me in the lounge. Evenings were for the porch, for sunsets that stretched out like slow goodbyes. I started writing again, too. Just little things at first. Memories, thoughts, fragments of stories. Sandra found out and convinced me to share a few at the weekly resident gatherings. You've got a way with words, she said, like you're talking straight to people's hearts. I told her I'd been talking to walls and oak trees long enough that people were a nice change of pace. So I read one now and then. Folks seemed to like them. Walt teased me about being the resident philosopher, but he never missed a reading. Sometimes afterward, someone would come up and say, You told my story even if you didn't mean to. And I'd just smile and nod, because that's what stories do. They sneak past the walls people build. One afternoon in late August, a letter came from the new owners of the Maple Street house. I almost didn't open it, thinking it was junk mail, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a short note. Mr. Harlan, we wanted to let you know how much we love the house. We've painted the kitchen, fixed the roof, and turned your garden into a small vegetable patch. But we kept the oak tree, just like you said we should. There's something about that tree. It feels alive in a way I can't quite explain. Our kids play under it every day, and sometimes when the wind blows through the leaves, it almost sounds like someone humming. We found your wife's initials carved into the base of the trunk with yours beside them. We left them just as they are. Thank you for building such a warm home. It still feels loved. Sincerely, the Turners. I read that letter twice, then set it beside Helen's picture. You hear that? I said softly. The old place is doing just fine. That evening I took it down to the porch and showed it to Walt. He read it, whistled low, and said, Guess you built something that lasts. I didn't build it alone, I said. He smiled. None of us do. The sun was setting then, a slow, honey-colored fade that turned everything gold. Walt leaned back, sipping his ginger ale, and said, You ever think about what comes next? I chuckled. You mean the big next? He nodded. Sometimes, I said, but not with fear. I think when it's time, it's time. And when it happens, I hope it's like falling asleep on the porch with a good story still in my lap. He nodded. Yeah, that'd be a good way to go. We sat there in companionable silence, the kind only old men can manage. No need to fill it, just to share it. A few weeks later, Tom and the kids came again, this time with a surprise. They'd made a little wooden sign that read Harlan's Porch in carved letters. They planted it in the grass beside the bench. Lily beamed. So everyone knows it's yours. I laughed, touched. Well, now I've gone and gotten famous. That sign's still there, last I checked. It makes me smile every time I see it. As summer began to wane, I found myself waking earlier, sometimes before dawn, just to watch the light change. There's something humbling about realizing how much beauty you still get to see after you've already said so many goodbyes. One morning in September, I sat on the porch with a notebook and wrote a few lines for myself. Not for anyone else, not to share, just a note to mark the moment. It said, You don't lose the people you love. You just learn to live in the echo of them. And sometimes, if you're quiet enough, the echo sounds an awful lot like music. That was the last thing I wrote before the summer turned to fall. The leaves began to change, painting the pond in reds and golds. The evenings grew cooler, and I started wearing Helen's old knitted blanket across my knees while I watched the sunset. Tom called often. The kids sent drawings. Lisa dropped off pies she swore were homemade. I never asked too many questions. The Turner's letter stayed on my desk beside Helen's photo and that heart-shaped stone, my little altar of the past. And through it all, I found myself smiling more, not because life was easy, but because it was enough. On my 81st birthday, the staff surprised me with a cake. Everyone sang off-key but cheerful. Tom and Lisa showed up with the kids carrying a small wrapped box. "Go on, open it," Tom said. Inside was a framed photo, me on the porch bench, the sunset blazing behind me, Lily leaning against my arm. The plaque at the bottom read, "Harlan's Porch, S 2024. I didn't say anything for a long moment, just looked at it, the colors glowing in the light. Then I said, I think I'm finally rich." "Rich?" Tom said, smiling. "You mean emotionally?" "No," I said with a grin. "Rich in porch time." They laughed, and for a while the whole room felt like home. That night, after everyone had gone and the halls had gone quiet, I went back out to the porch. The air was cool, the sky streaked with stars, and the pond shimmered like dark glass. I could almost hear Helen humming again, soft and steady. I sat there for a long time, the picture frame beside me, the moonlight brushing across my hands. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that everything had come full circle, the fear, the guilt, the leaving, the forgiving. All of it had folded back into peace. I took a deep breath, leaned back and whispered, "We did all right, sweetheart. We really did." Then I closed my eyes, listened to the crickets sing, and let the night carry me wherever it was I was supposed to go next. And if anyone asks about me now, I hope Tom tells them the truth, that I wasn't kicked out after Christmas, that I wasn't lonely, and that the last thing I ever built wasn't a house, but a porch that faced west, so I could always see the sunset coming.